Collection in Houston to speak with artist Tacita Dean about her exhibition, Blind Folly. Hi Tacita, it's so great to see you and to see the show today. And the exhibition is just amazing. I absolutely love it. I guess to begin with and start us off, this is your first big survey exhibition in the United States. And I just was curious how you ended up working with the Menil in the first place.
Well, we actually worked on this for a very, very long time. I think we worked out it was about 8 years of gestation, which included the pandemic, obviously. I first came here, I can't do the maths, 2000 and whatever it was, 18, 17, maybe earlier, 16 actually, because of possibly doing something in a different space with Michel, which was not possible for me because of it just didn't work. And then we started to talk about doing something else, and it just grew and grew. And then we decided to make it about drawing.
As part of your working with the Menil, you did a residence here in 2024. And I was curious, since you spent a night in the Cy Twombly Gallery, if you'd share a little bit of how you came about that idea and just what that experience was like.
Well, I knew that it was going to be the 30th anniversary of the gallery, which is happening right now, in fact. And I've been a fan I've loved the work of Cy Twombly since I first found out about it when I was a student. I did my art school thesis on him. And then later on I've done other things. I photographed his studio in Gaeta. I filmed him in Lexington, which is the film Edwin Parker, which is on show here at the moment. When I first came to the Menil, I'd heard about the Menil and the Cy Twombly Gallery years before. It was like a sort of mythical pilgrimage of a place. So it was so wonderful to actually be there. So we talked about me trying to make something or do something in the gallery, a book of some form or other. And I thought I could write about what goes through, try and catch the thoughts that go through one's head when one looks at a work of art or one by him. And I was here, and I spent a month here. I would go and sit in the gallery, and actually I found it very difficult to pin down these ideas. And then I thought, my God, what I would love to do is actually spend the night with the gallery. In some way give it a structure, a sort of endurance structure for me, but make it something a bit more exceptional. So I asked if I could spend the night with Cy, and I did. And I ended up making this book, which is called Why Cy. Why Cy is taken from one of his paintings. He's written Why Cy on it. And this is the book we're launching. We launched yesterday, in fact. I ended up taking these photographs, which are just like, spinning the camera. And I didn't expect them to come out in the way they did, but the color palette is definitely Cy Twombly, but also, and there are things that are recognizable in his writing. And then it's not, obviously, but it's complicated for an artist to make a work about another artist's work. It's one of the hardest things. And then I wrote a little booklet called My Night with Cy, which was a sort of diary of the night. It's very minimal, but it's...
So did you sleep at all, or were you just awake the whole time?
I was awake the whole time. I did try and lie down on one of those hard benches. And maybe I lost consciousness for a nanosecond, but I was still holding my glasses in my right hand. So obviously I didn't sleep very deeply, but no, I was basically awake.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm European, so in the early hours of the morning, I had a really long conversation with my husband in Berlin, and I was showing him everything. And so suddenly I was running out of time. I wanted the dawn, I turned the lights off. I wanted to see the light change on the painting, and especially Catalyst, the beautiful pink on the end.
What is it about Cy Twombly's work that really captured your attention, even from the beginning and still today?
It's really strange, but when I was an undergraduate I wasn't in London, I was down in the West Coast in Cornwall. I was obsessed with Greece, and I was writing in Greek, Cyrillic, and then I was actually using white gesso to erase it, and then writing on it again. And then visiting lecturers came down and said, do you know this artist called Cy Twombly? And of course I hadn't heard of him, but then I started to go to the library and look up. And then in 1987, there was an exhibition, a very important exhibition of his work at the Whitechapel Gallery, curated by Nick Sirota, who's here also, because he's on the foundation celebrating the 30th anniversary of the gallery, so he's actually in Houston today. And I came up from Falmouth, and it's like 5 hours on the train. It was expensive when you're a student. And I went to that exhibition, and it changed everything for me. It was a recognition, maybe, also, of like, you know, but also such a profound attraction to what he does. And that has not gone away. You know, when I was a foundation student, I loved Egon Schiele, but now I've slightly grown out of it. But now I've never grown out of Sy. I mean, I don't know what it is, but I think it's something very profound that happened with his, I always say it's a bit like a visitation. And that's the whole point about my film, Edwin Parker. He's not doing anything there, he's just sitting. And then what would happen is that he would wait, and then he'd have this moment of encounter. And I think what we experience in the work is this moment of encounter. I don't know what it is, but it takes me somewhere. And I have to say, he's the only artist that really pulls that off still for me.
The exhibition title, right, Blind Folly, references this idea of chance a little bit. So you can talk about how chance plays a role in most of your work.
I mean, chance has been sort of my fellow companion all the way from the very, very beginning. And it's not I can't give you a singular answer in a way, but I do rely on chance as a guiding principle to some extent. So Blind Folly actually comes from a work here called T&I, and that was because of, it's also to do with the blindness with which I approach work, which is that I don't have a preconceived idea of what I'm going to do. And of course I work with film, photochemical film, which is a medium of blindness. And especially when I work with masks, because I do know, the camera, a film camera, is, the word camera is room in Italian, so it's like a dark room, and in that dark room, mysteries happen because you can't see what's being exposed on your negative until you process it. So there's a blind folly in making films, and the folly is a sort of, like a surrender in a way. And there's kind of blindness in a lot of what I do. So even drawing a drawing like this, I don't really know what it will become, but the drawing makes itself to some extent. So years ago when I was making my drawings in Documenta, somebody came up to me and said, "Are you Tacita Dean's assistant?" And I said, it was just such a profoundly sad comment actually about the way a lot of work is made, but particularly for me, because I didn't know what I was going to do. I don't know what one mark is going to be after the next, so how could I possibly instruct anyone? It's ridiculous. Blindness in all the works, particularly the film works, but also in a lot of them. And chance, I rely on chance. Coincidences happen to me. I find I collect four-leaf clovers. I have this relationship to chance and coincidence. And
I'm glad you were talking about like the idea of like film, and I was noticing like everything today is digital, and like when people take photography, it's like you can see it instantly. So there's not that idea of you don't know what happens until you process it.
Can I tell you something really profound, which will happen with photochemical photography and the analog right now, is that it's still the authentic act. And I'm afraid with the mendacity of digital, and which we're seeing manifest in the world, that authentic act, I was thinking about this, a drawing is still an authentic act, but writing, we no longer know who's writing what. And with digital, we don't know who's making what. But when you expose light on a negative, that is still an authentic act. That's about verisimilitude. And drawing as an act is about a physical act of, in some respects, verisimilitude, but authenticity. So I think, people ask me about our artificial intelligence future, which is truly terrifying, but I do think the one thing we have to what might happen as as a repercussion is that we might see a return to authenticity in the analog. We might crave it. I mean, how do we know what's real anymore?
Yeah, that's such an interesting concept. And it seems like with your work, like the medium is very important. Can you talk about that even more, like beyond the films?
Yeah, well, medium is I even pluralize the word mediums for an artist, because media has been, completely co-opted by digital media and the media. The only way for an artist to have more than one medium is mediums, because it's a sort of real and tangible thing. So I use a lot of mediums, obviously photography. This is just chalk on, blackboard painted. It's actually just masonite painted with blackboard paint. These are found, I use a lot of found imagery, so those are found postcards. And behind you, and so the original is a found postcard. And then I use another found postcard. I mean, whatever motif is on it is irrelevant. And then I paint, so it's a painting, in fact. I paint the reversal, or, the mirror image of the real postcard onto the other, but the base is a postcard. So the one thing I find very difficult is to draw on blank pieces of paper. And I've just made a book called Base Matter and Uncommon Solvent. The premise of that book is the mediums in it, because I like surfaces that have a history. So even the photographs everything is photochemical. I mean, this is printed photograph. That one, for example, which is a purgatory tree, the original was a 10x8 negative. And then I turned that negative into a positive and made the positive a negative, so that actually what you're seeing is a jacaranda tree in negative, which makes it, jacaranda pink is green, and the green in the foreground of other trees is turning jacaranda pink because it's green. It's in a negative, the colour, if you ever look at a colour negative, it's very interesting what the colours are. So that was made in relationship to the Dante project, which was this ballet I worked on with Thomas Addis, who's here in the Menil today. And I'm in conversation with him tonight, and tomorrow he's doing a concert. He's one of probably the best living composers in the world, and he's here today. And we worked on he composed the Dante project, and I was the designer. I did the design and the costumes, and Wayne McGregor was the choreographer. And Purgatory, which was a middle state, and my whole concept was starting in negative, which was I drew a blackboard drawing in negative, so the white became the black, and the black became the white, and then I ended up with a film which was full of colour. But the middle state was Purgatory, which is between positive and negative, which is why I made a positive of a negative. And anyway, the tree, around the tree, is outlined, is white, just white crayon, white coloured pencil, basically. And and it's a labour of love, drawing around every single branch. But it gives this kind of otherworldly quality to it. And so that's another surface. A photograph is another surface. And then if you go behind here, I've painted with enamel on glass, carbon paper. There's even magnetic tape drawings. There's photogravure. There's monoprints. There's collage. There's many more found postcard works, and there's many other mediums.
So when you start working, one of the things that I found really interesting in the catalog is Michelle White talks about how it's a ground that you start with. So as part of your process is you find the ground first and then the idea, then you start working, or how do you start?
Well, it can be. There's no dogma.
Okay.
Everything is a bit different, but I am attracted to surfaces that have had a history. So there's a work called Telomere on the other side of this wall, in this space, which is a photogravure, but the actual origin of the idea was a metal sheet that had some sort of surface, like enamel surface, put on it. But it was used by my gallery in Paris as a way of wheeling the drinks trolleys from the courtyard into the gallery when they had openings. So it had all this incredible texture on it and marks, which I found really attractive. And it was just part there, and I thought, my God, that's a really sexy surface. So I used that as the basis, and then, and I copied the marks. And then within that, all those marks, I saw a sort of narrative related to a friend who went missing on a mountain. And so there's a sort of, there's a set of 4, but there's and you see there's a foot, and then there's a cloud, and then there's a sort of flurry of a storm of paper, and in the end there's a sort of whiteout in a way. But it's all about the accumulation of marks. And telomere, which is something that we all have, is attrition through accumulation. So the more you have, the less you are, in a way, because it's an aging thing. So I like the idea of accumulating marks, but it's an attrition. So that's why I took the title for that.
We're sitting in front of one of the blackboard drawings, and you talked a little bit about it, but I always found when I came in the gallery and saw the work in person and the grand scale, but you mentioned this a little bit too, to me everything does have a connection to photographs and like celluloid, that these come across to me as negatives, but can you talk a little about your process of thinking about just using monochromatic colors as well?
Well, this is made with this is called The Wreck of Hope. The title is based on this Caspar David Friedrich. That's sort of not even the real title of a famous painting by Caspar David Friedrich of a boat that gets trapped in the ice. And the boat is, the ice squeezes and destroys the boat. And the boat must have been called Hope, I guess. But actually, they call it something else, like, can't remember now. Anyway, I've always loved the title, The Wreck of Hope, and I was thinking about how right now there is a sort of wreck of hope and manifesting climate, obviously, as well, and the fact that the millennia that it has taken to build the ice is being destroyed in seconds. So this is kind of ice carving, which is when the breaking up of the ice cap, it just splits and then sinks into the ocean. So I was making works for a show in Paris that was I was basically based them on the 4 seasons, and this was in a way summer, actually. I was making it in the summer, but it was also winter, obviously. And something David Hockney once said about photography is that there's the time in a painting is so different from the time in a photograph, because it's just 1 nanosecond is the photograph, but time is all manifest all over the surface of a painting. And this is the same with this. I mean, I would come in, you could see dates on it, because I would write the dates. It's a way of greeting the board as well, is to write the date on it. And then, you see some, for example, 12th of August, Salman Rushdie, that was the day that he got stabbed. And there were things that just get written on the board, and then they get covered up. And it's a way of putting chalk on the board. It's a way of me engaging with it when you first come in, because it's always difficult, that first moment. It's made with sticks of chalk, that's all it is. They take weeks and weeks and weeks. It's a long process, but it is just made of school chalk. You could rub that off. There's
like
nothing
that
keeping it.
impermanence to it, yeah.
It's very impermanent, but they're robust too. It's because the surface is made by myself, so it's not like a blackboard which has got that sheen to it where you could just. I mean, part of it is made by my fingerprints and my sweat. I have to use in order to mold the marks. So.
When you work on it, do you do it at this large of scale, or do you work on each piece kind of individually?
No, I have to do the whole because,
right.
And I am on a scissor lift. And it is, so you draw there, and then you have to come down, you have to get off, you have to go and sit, and you see what you've done is completely wrong, and you have to get back on. So it is this mad process. I mean, everything, that's the folly. Everything I do is slightly mad.
Yeah. It's wonderful, though.
But you can only do what you set out to do, and I don't know why, but that's what I do.
Oh, it's so interesting. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because I'm really fascinated by your magnetic series, and has kind of a little bit of this scientific idea to it, but you record sound on a 60mm film, but then in the final work, you can't actually access that sound anymore. So how does that idea kind of come about to create something it's still your focus on mediums, but then the sound part is missing in the final work?
Do you mean the work here?
Yeah, like the magnetic
Well, I
pieces.
mean, what it is that's magnetic tape. And I recorded all these bird calls on it. And then I measure, the whole point about film is there's 24 frames per second. And that's a physical line, okay?
Yeah.
So film is the manifestation of time through distance, all right? So the bird calls, that happens in, so that happens in time. So some calls are really quite brief, and some are very, very long. And how I did it is when the bird stopped, that's became the end. So some of them are just squawks, and they're even under a second. So 24 of the sprockets is a second, so you can see how, so I cut it up in relation to the length of the call. The sound is still there.
Right.
You have to imagine it, because it's not gone away. It's just in the magnetic tape. But you can't, you could dismantle it, you could sellotape it all together and you could play it. It hasn't gone away. It's there.
Yeah, I just really like that idea, and that I think when you were talking about like the reality of like analog and film media is it's there, but it'll still be there. But I always think about the digital world. As soon as the electricity goes off, it's gone. Like we don't have it anymore.
Yeah, I know. Bring on the satellite.
Yes.
I think my work will exist. But I mean, of course, I'm not a Luddite. I have, I have an iPhone. People seem to think because I make films, I don't have an iPhone and I use typewriters. Of course I don't. I'm a person of the modern world, and all images now are stored digitally on the cloud or wherever that is. And but I try not to make works of art with digital, but I use it as a tool.
When you started talking about this idea of time, that was something that really kind of captured my attention too, of all of the works because of the idea of photography. And then there's this element of history too, particularly the films where you're documenting other artists' work, like Cy Tomlin in his studio or Klaus Oldenburg, like doing the drawings. So do you always think about this idea that everything you've done is capturing time, or is that just a side effect of the process?
Well, time is we all live with time. It's, I think film as a medium is incredible, intricately connected to time. Maybe just more just practically than digital, because you're always bound by the limits of the medium. So film, if you have a roll of film, it's 3 minutes or 10 minutes. Therefore, that brings about a discipline that you have to start thinking about time. Whereas digital, these cameras, they're just watching and they don't, yes, there's a battery element, but that's it. And that's getting better, but film is always bound to time. So what I try to do is make a sort of moment. My films are very edited. I'm not just sort of watching things, they are highly edited in order to give the illusion of real time, actually. But of course it's an artifice, whereas this is all, real time, and it's just, that I often use this analogy, like I think film looks, but video cameras just see, because looking involves a sort of an active action, something a bit more decisive, whereas you can just have a digital camera, as we have here, just watching. Whereas you can never do that with film. You have to think about focus, you have to think about light, you have to think about the fact that the film will run out after 3 minutes, then you have to change. So when I film something that it's highly, that there's a lot of trouble involved in it. I have to film, cuts down, especially when I filmed The Uncles, which were my uncles, talking. 2 old men one was my blood uncle, one was my uncle through marriage, whose fathers, my grandfather, Basil Dean, and my uncle's father, Michael Balkan, had basically started the British film industry. And their 2 sons were talking. And after 10 minutes, we'd have to have a film change, of course, which is interruptive, Mm-hmm. They didn't stop. On they went, chat, 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 chat. So when the camera started again, I had huge holes in whatever they were saying. And my job, which is difficult, and I do cut my films alone on a cutting table, was to somehow make it feel like the conversation was continuous, which is really not, sometimes really not very easy. So people think that it's just one take, it's laughable. I mean, my films are heavily worked, a lot of labor, but they give the impression of an absence, which is when I succeed.
Then thinking about this idea of time and the idea of looking, I was really interested in the story of where you all went. We're in an antique shop here in Houston, and you found those postcards that were so related to like Cy Twombly and like just those things of kind of, again, happenstance and chance. Can you talk a little bit about that, of how you came across those postcards?
Yeah, I mean, I use a lot of found imagery, as you know, and mainly postcards. And so Michelle, after the night with Cy, actually, she took me to August Antiques. And there was a drawer there, which was like disasters and foreign. And it's actually the postcards I collect the most are these, what they're called is real photo postcards, because they're actually photographs that were made into postcards. She took me to an antique store called August Antiques, and I found this drawer of postcards, the real photo postcards. I mean, hundreds of them, loads of them. And the first thing, there was one anomalous postcard in this drawer, which was a sort of Crommelin postcard from the 80s of Canterbury, which is where I was born. And I was thinking, what the hell? So I was already saying to Michelle, look, Canterbury in a drawer in Houston, it's the only colour postcard in this drawer. And these other postcards were all of disasters. Tornado, floods, beautiful, you know, all from around 1910 to about 1930. They were, actually it was a, and then suddenly I find this one that just, you know, is painted in gouache. It just says Cy. And then the clone aspect of it is fainter, but the Cy had been, you know, and it was just like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. So I bought all the postcards, actually. I bought them all. And then I gave the found Cy to the Menil because of this. It was just too much in relation to, and we hung, the last room in this exhibition is works connected to Cy Twombly, you know, literally, and then just in terms of shared subject matter. And you know, the irony is, a few weeks later, the Direco came and hit August Antiques. So I actually made a postcard edition of the Direco of August Antiques, and I sent it to people, so everyone got this postcard of this, and it was in the style of the 1910, 1920 postcards.
That's great. Sometimes it's the things that it's hard to explain is what draws you to art, which I think is the best thing about art, is everyone is going to bring something else to it.
Yeah, I mean, art is always about the person looking at it, not about the person making it.
Well, I think we'll end there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I love your work. It's great.
Thank you.
Find all of our videos and sign up for our newsletter at artthisweek.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.